Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are discussing digital giving. You're stuck with me today. Zofia is off with COVID, so she's watching but not participating. So Zofia, I hope you get better soon. My name is John Pepin. I'm Chief Executive of Philanthropy Impact. This is episode 82 of the Walk in My Shoes series. If you can find them all on YouTube by searching Philanthropy Impact. The session is 30 minutes long, and we're just going to in effect skim the subject, and we would like to do a more in-depth one later this year or early next year. Please use the live chat to introduce yourself, to ask questions of the panel, to make comments. We will try and follow those, but as I say, 30 minutes goes very fast. So I'd like to introduce the chair for this afternoon, Darcy Gillies, who is the founder and CEO of Maanch and one of our board members. And Darcy, shall I leave it to you to introduce the speakers, or are you okay with that? Okay, over to you then.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everyone. It's been a long time since I've been on Walk in My Shoes, either as a panelist or as a chair. Fantastic to be back here. I particularly love these sessions because they are 30 minutes, which means we get a lot of depth and coverage on a particular topic, and all of this is delivered in snapshot, bite-sized, actionable insights from experts in the sector. Today we're going to speak about digital giving, and we have three different perspectives from very different practitioners in the field. We have with us today Hugo McDonaugh, who will talk with us about, maybe I'll pass on to you, Hugo, first. Why don't you introduce yourself and also just share some top line insights on what you see in the digital giving space. Over to you.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Hugo McDonaugh, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company here in the UK called Perpetual, Altruism. I've been in crypto now since about 2012, discovered it, having first read the Bitcoin white paper back then alongside my older brother, George. And after that, got very interested in the technology and what it can do. And Ethereum came out. That was my next sort of aha moment. And then more recently, other things like the Polkadot network and other things, but we won't go too into detail there. But basically what we do is we use NFT technology predominantly as a way to create a new form of sort of perpetual passive giving and income streams for charities. We did that with a project called Cryptograph back in 2020, which is still operating. And we're now creating a new platform called myNFT.com, which should make it possible for people to do that, but at a much larger scale and not just on a sort of one-off project basis. For me, this technology is extremely disruptive on all possible avenues, and where I find it very interesting of its interaction with the philanthropic sector is this idea, at least initially, of being able to create a perpetually passive sort of income instrument. With a cryptograph, this specific token we created, you can't destroy it. You can program in a royalty that is enshrined and encoded on the chain. So every time this thing is transferred, it raises new revenue for the charity. And eventually as well, with this kind of system, you could create a place where, people who give and philanthropists can gift aid these things when they transfer them, and they can create whole new economies outside of that. So an NFT is a programmable digital deed, and I think it's very powerful, and I think it's got massive implications for the giving sector.
Thank you, Hugo. I will come back to you. I think the audience would very much appreciate a little bit more insight on the different terms you've used, crypto, blockchain, NFT, maybe a little bit of simpler explanations so that everyone is on the same page. And then also, we'd love to hear from you in terms of, what would be like the practical enablers to scale up some of these technologies and make them practically relevant. But before we move into that, I'll pass on to our next panelist, Greg Davies, everything to do with data and behavior. Maybe, Greg, I'll pass on to you to introduce yourself and your key insights on digital giving.
Thanks, Darshita. Hello, I'm Greg Davies. I specialize in applied behavioral finance, and I co-run a fintech, Oxford Risk. We build software to help people make better financial decisions. And I think crucially for this discussion, when we say better financial decisions, we don't just mean things that are going to improve your risk-return trade-off. We mean financial decisions that are going to also align better to your values, to what you want to achieve and doing good with your wealth. So it's really about how you can unlock the ability of people to align their financial systems more closely to what they want to get from life. And as such, we're in the digital world. We're building technology, increasingly technology that enables people to take control of their finances in a more effective way. And at the same time, we're also measuring preferences. We use psychometric tools to help people to understand their financial personality, their preferences for ESG, for different causes that they might want to steer money towards, either philanthropically or in investing. And you bring these things together, the digital and the preference measurement. And I think what it really allows, the great thing about the digital giving thing is it starts to allow hyper-personalization. You start to be able to talk to people as individuals at a massive scale. And nobody ever makes an investment or a donation or anything, really. You're committing your money until they're emotionally comfortable with that. And one of the things that makes people comfortable is the fact that the message and the narrative is personalized to who they are and what their preferences are. So by moving into digital giving and combining that with profiling, we can really unlock a great deal more comfort that people have with giving, and we can make sure that the decisions they make are much more aligned to what they want to achieve in their lives.
Thank you, Greg. More questions for later. Passing on to our next panelist, Edward Thomas from Oxfam.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Edward Thomas from Oxfam. I work in the partnerships team. Oxfam's connection with digital giving and the blockchain. We're perhaps as a venerable charity, not managing a little bit of our risk profile, not currently accepting bitcoins through Oxfam Great Britain, but we are working on 2 projects using the blockchain in some of the countries we work in. In Vanuatu, for example, we're using the blockchain, which is Hugo will tell us more later, but a digital distributed ledger to help make cash payments to victims of a hurricane much more efficient. We're reducing the delivery time of cash distributions by 96% and distribution costs by 75%, which kind of really shows a real useful application for this sort of technology. And in Cambodia, we've got a pilot scheme for rice farmers, which is helping rice farmers get better prices for their products with their suppliers using smart contracting. The reason I kind of mentioned up front that we're not currently accepting Bitcoin at OGB is because, we do work in a sort of regulatory environment. So we've got to be quite careful around, money laundering concerns and ethical considerations, as well as, with Bitcoin in particular, there are concerns around the energy use for these transactions now, and up front, we're not seeing the donor demand for giving via Bitcoin just yet. But as you can see from this project that I've mentioned, there's clearly the digitalization of money is coming.
Thank you, Edward. Maybe I'll start with my initial questions to you, Edward. So if you can shed a little bit more light on the subject in terms of, obviously Oxfam is a global organization, and what are like the practical enablers for you as an organization to accept digital currencies, and also, do you have any pushback from any of your donors when you start distributing or when you start implementing digital projects?
So certainly on the digital project side, on the implementation, they're looking for us to innovate and looking for us to, reduce those burdens, to make sure that, looking at these tools to improve the way we deliver our work. And I think, we'll always look to do that. I think raising funding within the UK, we do want to make sure we're compliant with the Charity Commission rules on, as mentioned, on anti-money laundering and where the source of funding. We have processes in place to make sure that we don't raise money, for example, from sectors connected with pornography, the arms sector, tobacco, and things like that. So, cryptocurrencies, by their definition, are cryptic around where the money's come from. So we have to ensure that there are processes in place. And I think, for every charity looking to accept these sorts of digital currencies, it's an additional process on top of the existing processes that they might have in place to accept cash or any other form of currency. And so they've got to weigh up the investment in those resources to make sure that there are processes and governance in place for what happens when you accept these currencies, let alone what happens when you do have them, how long you hold them for as well. Others will, I'm sure, speak about the volatility of these cryptocurrencies in recent months means that, for our planning purposes, somebody may have said to us, well, we want to give you £50,000 worth of Bitcoin. It's this much in Bitcoin. By the time we disperse that funding, at the moment, that's Bitcoin's 50% down on the beginning of the year. So that's a real risk to the impact we want to deliver. So these are all considerations that charities and donors need to figure out when we're thinking about using these currencies. None of them are insurmountable, but it is an additional piece of work that you want to ensure gets done before you start working in this manner.
Thank you. So considerations around risk and governance are key before we start accepting currencies. I'll move us back to Hugo. If you can, so in cryptocurrency, NFT, and then more specifically, how can charities or nonprofits really use NFTs and other digital assets as a source for revenues?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it definitely alludes to a lot of the potential hurdles that come with innovative new technology that doesn't have all of the frameworks around it that more traditional stuff has. In our case, specifically for Cryptograph, we implemented KYC and AML for anyone over a certain amount of transactional amount, which corresponds with the regulatory environment. And we as a company actually received all of that income, and then we would pass it out using a charitable trust to various charities. So that was one way of trying to fit something that would work with the status quo. And there are lots of different people and companies that are looking at things like that. There's one great business out in the US called The Giving Block, run by a really cool guy called Alex Wilson, who've tried to make it super easy for on the back end side for charities to integrate with them. And they've got a little widget, and you can just sort of donate using your Ethereum or your Bitcoin. But obviously, there's a lot of heavy lifting that happens on the back end with the charity to make that possible, and the Giving Block are sort of trying to help with that. So there are lots of companies and people looking at trying to make it easier for charities to be able to get into this space and access to being able to receive donations in these assets, and then also being able to spend the capital, whether it has to be converted into fiat or directly used as crypto to get the good or service to the person in need. I think that we're definitely entering a period where the technology's been out for long enough, and there's been a lot of volume up and down across the space, and regulators and various institutions are now looking at it in a much more serious fashion, and they're trying to build frameworks that will allow bigger institutions to be able to engage with the space. I know that the MiCA proposals in the EU at the moment should come out over the next 2 years, and the FCA are looking very closely at it. And the Crypto Asset Task Force in the UK are going to release something, I think, next year. So yeah, it's all sort of all coming. I think opportunity-wise, there really are many. The perpetual sort of passive idea that we created at Cryptograph, I think, is very interesting. Charities have ambassadors. Those ambassadors have personalities that they can monetize. They could create something like an artwork or an experience that could be tokenized as an NFT that could then be sold into an open market with all of the proceeds going to the charity and indeed further recurring revenue from future transactions. And you can do other really interesting things there. For example, for charities, you have to, every fundraise, every event, it's a new expenditure, it's a new capital outlay, it's a new thing that you have to do to create the funds that you want to raise. With an NFT, for example, once it's been initially created, depending on what the value structure of it was, 3 or 4 years later, you could attach new value to it. So you could say, oh, actually, the person who created it, now they're doing a special dinner or a live talk, and you get access to it if you own this NFT. 3 or 4 years after it had been initially created, you can now create new secondary market value for this asset. And because of the way it's coded on the chain, that value goes back to the initial charity that commissioned it, let's say. So it's an entirely sort of new way to engage. And I think Greg alluded to the idea of personalization, which is very, very true here as well. With NFTs, you can create a lot of sort of authenticity with your community, and you can have direct interactions with this sort of digital bridge that allows for value exchange to become much more sort of personal. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, and I guess the perpetual passive one interests me, and that's something that I think is interesting because it means that charities can maximize an initial capital outlay for future fundraising without having to do it every single time and lose costs in that process.
Thank you, Hugo. Appreciate it. Greg, so coming back to sort of the initial question we started with, which is obviously understanding preferences. I think there is also a generational trend probably you're able to draw from the data you have. And then also sort of trade-offs, if you can talk about, shed some light on trade-offs between generations or between asset considerations, and how digital currencies influence any of those decisions.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the big advantages of digital philanthropy is the data that you get almost automatically as a byproduct. I mean, Edward's talked, I think, the efficiency of it and the rapidity with which you can get money to where it needs to be, absolutely. But the data that you're collecting as well just really helps you to sharpen up the messages at an individual level. Now, there are, of course, differences with regard to age profiles here. And so, it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that the younger generation who've grown up as digital natives are often more comfortable having this engagement with new fields through digital areas. I mean, pretty much anyone now, across all age groups, the level of digitization has increased massively. But it is true, I think, it's not an anti-digital thing. It's the fact that younger people are more willing to embrace the combination of novelty and digital. So what we do see is in philanthropy, the digital approaches can be more effective with younger age groups. But more interestingly than that, actually, there is one of the trade-offs that you mentioned there is if you're trying to get people into, let's say, impact investing or ESG investing, to put their money somewhere that's not philanthropy, it's drawing on the same pool of assets. So if I, as a wealth manager or a financial advisor, am trying to get someone to put money into ESG, you're taking money from your investable wealth, which is the same pool where you would take your philanthropy from. And one of the things we found is that there's a very strong attitudinal dimension, which is really about openness to philanthropy versus openness to impact investing. And there's an age element to this as well. So older people, on the whole, are more comfortable with philanthropic giving than they are with muddling up their investment portfolio with ESG, etc. So we have to be quite careful with certain portions of the population that in encouraging people to invest in ESG assets, invest in impact sustainable assets, that you're not simultaneously undermining they're undermining or cannibalizing the money that they would otherwise use to give to philanthropy. But if you do this right, if we personalize it well, you give people clear recommendations and guidelines as to what they should do and how much they should do. A lot of people simply do not do as much good with their wealth as they want to, not because they're not nice people, not because they're not altruistic, but because we lack institutional social norms and guidelines about what is appropriate. And very often, if people don't go, I don't know what an appropriate amount for me to give or donate on an annual basis is, then that decision makes them feel uncomfortable and they will pull away from that decision. And as a result, they'll give less than they might want to. So the more that we can start to give people individual personalized guidelines about your wealth is so big, here's what you're engaged in, here is an appropriate amount for you to give, and here are the paths that are most linked to your preferences. You're basically, what effectively you're doing is you're unlocking comfort with making those transactions. Because otherwise, where there's discomfort, people go, you know what, I'll think about it next year or the year after that. And that just can be done much more powerfully in a digital medium than face-to-face.
Thank you, Greg. I think you make a very good point about, I love the phrase particularly about, unlocking comfort, because it is about people feeling, especially giving is such a personal choice. It is, especially when it's individual giving rather than institutional giving, that one is, sort of having that knowledge. And I think especially in the digital space, the next aspect is clarity on how that this money is not at risk, etc. Because generally people giving have very low thresholds of risk as well. So I think balancing that is going to be crucial in the time to come.
Yeah.
We're starting to get some questions from the audience. Edward, sorry, if you can please take the question from Richard on gift aid. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely correct. Currently, cryptocurrency donations are not eligible for gift aid. The reason being cryptocurrencies are not yet recognized as legal tender, so technically they aren't money. They would need to be, I think as one of the other attendees has commented, need to be converted into cash, sterling, for that donation to be recognized with full gift aid. And again, that is a big driver of income for charities. Gift aid is a phenomenal mechanism here in the UK. So it is for cryptocurrencies not to get that benefit will be a driver of the behavior of donors to not necessarily give, certainly mainstream donors, to not necessarily choose that donation path because they'll be missing out on 40% of the benefit to the charity. But something I'm sure that the sector will and the Charity Commission will be looking at as we go on.
Super, thank you. We have a few more minutes left. Edward, if I can put you on the spot and maybe ask for you to share maybe some more highlights or insights in terms of how you mentioned earlier your programs with Cambodia and the other humanitarian efforts. How easy or how difficult it was, and was the digital really an enabler? And if it was, then what benefits did it really provide to the beneficiaries in the end?
So, particularly for the distribution of cash in the humanitarian context, the use of that technology certainly drove up, the user preference. So, one of the things that we see in humanitarian emergencies is if you can get cash to people in need quickly, then they'll have much better choice to spend it on the things they need. So us, using this technology enabled to reduce those the time it took for them to get what they needed, but also put the power of those choices in their hands. And so you could track the transactions, and it meant you could empower those beneficiaries with that cash. So I think that was a huge driver in the impact that we're looking to see, because in a humanitarian context, we often think of bags of rice or big bags of products stamped with big agency logos, when in a lot of these places the markets get back up and running quite quickly. And so if we can get the cash quickly to them, we don't have to fly things over by plane or goods by plane. We can use these technologies to reduce those times it takes to get them the cash, and also use the cash to empower them to make their own choices and what they need in those emergencies.
Thank you. And then Greg, also sorry putting you on the spot. We do have time left, so it's good to just go sort of underneath the topics you've mentioned. Are you seeing any sort of behavioral trends when it comes to adoption of digital giving in particular, or even in investing across generations? Is it true that it's generally the Gen Zs that are more pro giving digitally and are less risk averse, etc.? So what kind of trends do you see from a generational lens in this giving space?
I mean, I think that is true, for the reasons that we outlined earlier. But I think one of the other benefits that we've got is that the digital environment often enables connectivity between donors and recipients in a much more direct way. One of the other hats that I wear is I chair Sound and Music, which is the UK's national agency for new music and new composers. And we're busy working on this platform that takes the whole notion of patrons. It used to be that composers would go and work with a wealthy person, and there's this patronage. But now we have this ability to create these networks of patrons that at scale are creating these links between individual donors and the causes that they're giving to, that fosters a much closer emotional connection. And that sort of thing, I think, allows us to start stepping outside of the generational issue, because if I'm fostering connections in the right way, it no longer is the case that just the younger people want to do it and the older people don't, etc.
Thank you, Greg. John, over to you.
Did you have one quick question to Hugo before I come in, or do you want to just move on?
Well, I did have a question for Hugo.
Go ahead.
Which is, what is one thing charities can do now to get prepared for the digital revolution?
I think learning is a big one. I think looking at interacting with startups, young startups that are trying to build legitimate frameworks for this to work is, I think, a very good way to learn. Companies like the Giving Block, companies like ourselves, and understanding, the whole space is very technology first. It really is. I mean, it's programmable money, it's programmable rights, it's customizable deeds. I mean, this is what this technology is unlocking. So having someone in your company or in your team that understands this technology, has read the Bitcoin white paper, has read the Ethereum white paper, understands the concept of a smart contract, will put you one step ahead of many others when it comes to understanding the real implications of what this technology can unlock. So I think it's about getting yourselves educated earlier, I would say, is the best thing here, because it is complex space.
Thank you. Over to you, John.
Thank you. It's fascinating because we're going through a process of reimagining philanthropy impact, looking over the next 10 years. And so we'll be picking up a lot of what's been discussed here. So Darcy, Edward, Greg, Hugo, that was brilliant. I'm going to, Zofia, I know you control the turning off, but I think I'm going to go over a few minutes because this is so fascinating. So can we have final words of wisdom? So about 30 seconds or so from each of you. if you look in the chat, there's some really interesting solutions to the gift aid thing that are being presented by Pippa, and there's issues around institutional change, etc. So let's start with Edward.
Oh, great. Thanks, John. Words of wisdom, I think the digitalization of money is coming, and it's, if anything, it's accelerating, despite, volatilities in prices. One thing that we all need to do is, there is the work, as I alluded to kind of earlier on in the conversation, to make sure that we're ready to implement these tools effectively for not only our donors, but for the people we want to kind of have impact with. And so, that is sometimes quite hard, boring work, regulatory stuff, making sure that we're managing risk correctly, but the opportunities are massive. So it's all worth of us doing the work.
Great, thank you very much. Greg, you're next, and I really like your phrase, unlocking comfort. Can I steal it?
Yes, with pleasure.
30
Absolutely.
seconds.
No, for me, I think it really comes down to our ability to enhance the conversations that we have with donors, and the marrying up of cutting edge behavioral science with data analytics and digital. The intersection of those three things for me is somewhere where we're only just starting to unlock the benefits, and it is, the benefits are in turn unlocking that comfort. It's all of this is about helping people to do what they actually want to do anyway, but making it easier and more comfortable for them. And the technology all too often is about making it easier for people, but doesn't think about the comfortable piece of that quite enough.
Thank you. Hugo, I have 6 million questions for you, including what quantum computing is going to do in this whole area. I'll give you 45 seconds to try and figure that out.
On the quantum computing question, or
whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. Specifically, the power of compute usually scales with the power of encryption. So the minute that we have a quantum computer that could, let's say, decrypt a public key, find a private key from a public key, you can add a layer of encryption using that same technology to make it difficult to do that. So they usually scale together. So I think it's something that's possible to solve. As an aside, I think I'm very much on Edward's thinking here. The technology is extremely powerful. It makes peer-to-peer transactions very, 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 very real. It allows people to be more individual with how they give, what they give, and it unlocks, because it's programmable money, it's programmable rights, it's programmable deeds. I've said that before, but with that comes a whole new way as to how charities and philanthropic institutions can get creative with how they raise and how they give. So yeah, I mean, get exploring. It's a very, very exciting technology.
Thank you, Hugo. I find it quite fascinating because we're talking about all this stuff, but many charities have a lot of trouble with data management and business intelligence, so they still have a few steps to take. Darcy, your final words of wisdom.
Thank you. 3 takeaways for me from this session. One is how important learning is to help us really unlock the full opportunities. The importance of technology in enabling and making it easy and comfortable for all stakeholders. And finally, the importance of policy and regulatory environment to also make adoption of these solutions practically relevant to society.
Terrific. Thank you very much, all. That was brilliant. So thank you.